Couple vanished on Alaskan Trail in 2004. Drone recorded something inexplicable in 2023. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot as Sarah Thompson adjusted her lightweight hiking pack one final time. Her husband, Michael, stood beside her, squinting against the bright July light as he folded their trail map with methodical precision. They had driven from Portland, Oregon, with dreams of experiencing Alaska's untamed wilderness. And now, standing at the threshold of the Talkeetna mountain range, those dreams felt within reach. "Are you sure we have everything?" Sarah asked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, a nervous habit that appeared whenever she was about to embark on something new. Michael smiled reassuringly. "We've checked 3 times, sweetheart. Water, protein bars, first aid kit, camera, and the emergency beacon." He patted his pack. "Martha said this is one of the safest intermediate trails in the area." Martha Henderson had been their gracious host at the small lodge where they'd spent their first night. A woman in her 60s with weathered hands and kind eyes, she had the sort of local knowledge that came from decades of welcoming travelers to this remote corner of Alaska. The lodge was modest. 6 rooms, a communal dining area, and a front porch overlooking the dense wilderness beyond. They had arrived on July 17th, 2004, their rental car loaded with gear and hearts full of anticipation. This trip represented something special, a celebration of Michael's recent promotion and a chance to reconnect away from their busy Seattle lives. Sarah worked as a school counselor, spending her days helping teenagers navigate their challenges, while Michael managed software development projects. They were the kind of couple who planned adventures carefully, researched destinations thoroughly, and always told someone where they were going. The trail they had chosen was marked intermediate level, challenging enough to feel accomplished, but not dangerous for experienced hikers like themselves. They had been hiking together since college, when weekend trips to the Cascade Mountains had been their escape. Over the years, they had tackled trails in Colorado, Utah, and Montana, always returning with stories and photographs that filled their friends with gentle envy. "The weather forecast is perfect," Michael continued, consulting his radio weather device. "Clear skies, mild temperatures, light winds. We couldn't have asked for better conditions." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of excitement that preceded their adventures. Her well-broken-in leather boots had carried her up countless mountainsides. Her navy blue jacket was tied around her waist, ready for the temperature drop that would come with altitude. The digital camera in her pack held fresh batteries and an empty memory card, waiting to capture the remote beauty they hoped to find. The lodge's morning routine had been pleasantly unhurried. Martha had served them hearty breakfast, eggs, bacon, and thick-cut toast, along with coffee that seemed to extract the chill from their bones. Her husband Robert had joined them, sharing stories of local wildlife and pointing out landmarks on their trail map. He was a quiet man with calloused hands and practical wisdom from a lifetime in the wilderness. "The trail starts easy," Robert had explained, tracing the route with his finger. "First 2 miles are mostly flat, following the old mining road. Then you'll hit the switchbacks. That's where it gets interesting. There's a vista point about 4 miles in that'll take your breath away." Martha had added gentle warnings about staying hydrated and watching time. "Most folks do the loop in about 5 hours. You'll want to be heading back by mid-afternoon to make sure you're out before dark." Now, standing at the trailhead, Sarah felt the weight of Martha's words. Not as worry, but as the respectful caution that experienced outdoors people always carried. The wilderness demanded respect, and she and Michael had always given it that. The parking area was simple, just gravel with space for perhaps a dozen cars. A wooden sign marked the trail entrance, paint weathered but still legible. Talkeetna Ridge Trail, it read. 4.2 miles to Vista Point. Hikers travel at own risk. Register at trailhead. Michael walked to the registration box, a metal container, mounted near the trail entrance. He filled out their information carefully: names, emergency contact, planned return time, vehicle description. It was the mundane safety precaution that responsible hikers always observed, the small act that could mean the difference between minor delay and major emergency. As he wrote, Sarah studied the surrounding landscape. The forest pressed close. On all sides, a mixture of spruce and hemlock that seemed to absorb sound and create pockets of cathedral-like quiet. She could hear distant running water, probably the creek that Robert had mentioned, which paralleled the trail for the first mile. "Ready?" Michael asked, sealing their registration form in the weatherproof box. Sarah shouldered her pack and nodded. The weight felt good across her shoulders, familiar and comforting. They had carried these same packs up mountains in 4 states, and the gear inside represented years of careful selection. Nothing was left to chance. They set off down the trail together, footsteps creating steady rhythm. On packed earth, the morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and moss. Sarah felt her spirits lift with each step, the stress of daily life already beginning to fade. The trail was well maintained, clearly marked with occasional blazes on trees. For the first hour, they walked in comfortable companionship, pointing out interesting rock formations and stopping to photograph striking views. Michael's camera clicked steadily, capturing the interplay of light and shadow through the forest canopy. They encountered no other hikers, not unusual for a weekday morning on a remote trail. The solitude felt precious rather than concerning. This was what they had come to Alaska to find: genuine wilderness, untouched landscape that was becoming increasingly rare in their modern world. As they climbed higher, the character of the forest began to change. Trees grew sparser, and glimpses of sky appeared through the canopy. The sound of their footsteps seemed to echo differently in the thinner air, and Sarah found herself breathing more deliberately as altitude made itself known. "How are you feeling?" Michael asked during one of their rest stops. They had been hiking for about 2 hours, and both felt the pleasant fatigue that came with steady physical exertion. "Great," Sarah replied, meaning it. Her legs felt strong, her breathing was steady, and the beauty around them seemed to grow more spectacular with each elevation gain. "This is exactly what I needed." They shared water and a protein bar, sitting on a fallen log that provided a natural rest stop. The silence around them was profound, not the absence of sound, but the presence of deeper quiet that seemed to pulse with life. They could hear birds calling in the distance, the whisper of wind through pine needles, and somewhere far below, the continued murmur of running water. It was during this rest that Sarah noticed the first sign that they were truly in wild country. Michael had spotted tracks in a muddy patch beside the trail, large with distinctive claw marks. "Bear?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. Michael studied the tracks more closely. "Looks like it, but they're not fresh. Probably from yesterday or the day before." He stood and shouldered his pack. Robert said bear encounters are rare on this trail, especially during the day. They continued upward, both more alert now but not alarmed. They had hiked in bear country before and knew the protocols. Make noise, stay together, never run. The tracks actually provided certain satisfaction, proof that they were in genuine wilderness, sharing the mountain with its original inhabitants. The switchbacks that Robert had mentioned proved to be the trail's most challenging section. The path zigzagged up a steep slope, gaining elevation quickly through sharp turns that left both breathing hard. But with each turn, the views became more spectacular. They could see across the valley now to distant peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky. "I can see why people fall in love with this place," Sarah said during another rest stop. They were perhaps 3.5 miles into their hike, with the vista point tantalizingly close. Michael was consulting his watch. "We're making good time. Should reach the viewpoint within the hour, then we'll have plenty of time to enjoy it before heading back." The final stretch led them through an area where trees gave way almost entirely to rocky outcroppings and alpine vegetation. The trail became less distinct here, marked primarily by cairns, small stacks of stones that previous hikers had built to guide the way. Sarah found something almost spiritual about following these ancient markers, evidence of all the people who had made this same journey before them. When they finally reached the vista point, the view was everything Robert had promised and more. The entire Talkeetna Valley spread out below them, a patchwork of forest and meadow extending to the horizon. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks dusted with snow even in mid-July. The sky was an impossible shade of blue, scattered with clouds that cast moving shadows across the landscape. "It's incredible," Sarah breathed, immediately reaching for her camera. She began taking photos methodically, trying to capture not just the view, but the feeling of standing at this remote point so far from any road or building that they might have been the only people on Earth. Michael found a comfortable rock and pulled out lunch, more protein bars, dried fruit, and water. The simple food tasted extraordinary in the thin mountain air, seasoned with accomplishment and the kind of peace that only came from being truly away from everything. They spent nearly an hour at the vista point, talking quietly, taking photos, and simply absorbing the magnificent isolation. Other than the wind and the distant cry of a hawk, the silence was complete. It was the kind of experience that would become a treasured memory, the type of moment that couples would revisit in conversation for years to come. As the afternoon progressed, Michael began checking his watch more frequently. "We should probably start thinking about heading back," he said eventually. "Martha said most people take about 5 hours total, and we want to be out before dark." Sarah nodded reluctantly. She could have stayed all day, but Michael was right about the timing. The responsible thing was to begin their descent while they still had plenty of daylight ahead. They packed up their lunch debris carefully. Leave no trace was a principle they had always followed religiously. Sarah took one final photograph of Michael against the spectacular backdrop. Then they began the journey back down the mountain. The descent started pleasantly enough. The switchbacks that had challenged them on the way up now provided a different kind of workout, requiring careful attention to footing, but allowing them to move at good pace. They were both experienced enough to know that more hiking accidents happened on the way down than up, when tired legs and the pull of gravity combined to create potential hazards. They stopped periodically to rest and take in views they had missed on their upward climb. The changing angle of afternoon sun created new patterns of light and shadow, making familiar landmarks look subtly different. Sarah found herself taking mental photographs, trying to memorize details that her camera couldn't capture. It was during one of these rest stops, perhaps an hour into their descent, that Sarah first noticed Michael seemed quieter than usual. He was studying the trail ahead with unusual intensity, and when she asked if everything was all right, he paused before answering. "I'm probably just being paranoid," he said finally. "But does this section look familiar to you?" Sarah looked around more carefully. They were in an area of dense forest, with tall trees creating a canopy that filtered light into shifting patterns. The trail was clear enough, marked with the same occasional blazes they had followed on the way up. "It all looks pretty similar," she said. "Why?" Michael pulled out their map and compass, studying them with focused attention. "I thought we should have reached the creek crossing by now. According to my calculations, we've been hiking down for over an hour." A small flutter of unease stirred in Sarah's stomach, but she pushed it down. Michael was usually excellent with navigation. If he was concerned, it was worth taking seriously, but there was probably a simple explanation. Maybe we're moving slower than we thought, she suggested. The downhill sections can be deceptive. Michael nodded, but she could see he wasn't entirely convinced. He spent several more minutes with the map and compass, taking readings and checking their position against visible landmarks. Finally, he folded the map and put it away. "You're probably right," he said. "Let's keep going. The creek crossing should be just ahead." They continued down the trail, but Sarah noticed that Michael kept checking his watch and consulting his compass. The easy rhythm of their earlier hiking had been replaced by something more purposeful, more concerned. She found herself paying closer attention to their surroundings, looking for the familiar landmarks Robert had described. Another 30 minutes passed, and they still hadn't reached the creek crossing. The forest around them seemed denser somehow, the trees taller and more closely spaced. The trail remained clear, but Sarah was beginning to share Michael's concern about their location. "Maybe we should stop and really figure out where we are," she suggested during their next rest break. Michael was already pulling out the map again. This time, he spread it on a flat rock and studied it with intense concentration. He took compass readings from several different positions, triangulating their location with methodical precision. After several minutes, he looked up with a frown. "According to this, we should have passed the creek crossing 20 minutes ago, and that rock formation we saw earlier, I can't find it on the map." The flutter of unease in Sarah's stomach grew stronger. She moved closer to study the map herself. Though navigation had always been more Michael's strength than hers, the trail route seemed straightforward enough, a clear line from the trailhead to the vista point and back. But if Michael was right about their timing, something wasn't adding up. "Could we have taken a wrong turn somewhere?" she asked. Michael considered this possibility. "I don't think so. The trail was pretty clear, and I didn't see any major junctions where we could have gone wrong." He paused, studying the map again. "But let me double-check our route." They spent the next 15 minutes carefully reviewing their path, checking the map against their memories of the terrain they had covered. The more they analyzed their route, the more puzzling their situation became. They were experienced hikers following a well-marked trail in good weather and with plenty of daylight remaining. There was no obvious reason for them to be lost. And yet the nagging certainty grew that something was not quite right. Michael made the decision that would define everything that came after. "I think we should try to retrace our steps back to the vista point," he said. "From there, we can start fresh and make sure we're on the right path." It was a reasonable decision, the kind of conservative choice that experienced outdoors people made when faced with uncertainty. Better to add an extra hour to their hike than to continue down an unknown path as daylight began to fade. They turned around and began climbing back up the trail they had just descended. The physical effort of regaining altitude was significant, especially after they had already hiked for most of the day, but both were determined to resolve their navigational confusion. As they climbed, Sarah found herself studying their surroundings with new intensity. The forest that had seemed beautiful and welcoming on their morning ascent now felt somehow different. The trees seemed to press closer, and the afternoon light filtering through the canopy created shadows that shifted and moved in ways that made her feel slightly disoriented. "How much farther to the vista point?" she asked after they had been climbing for what felt like a very long time. Michael checked his watch and consulted the map again. "Should be close now, maybe another 15 minutes. But 15 minutes passed, then 30, then 45. The trail continued to climb steadily, but the vista point remained elusive. They were both becoming genuinely tired now, the accumulated effort of their day's hiking beginning to take its toll. More concerning was the gradual realization that the landscape around them didn't look quite the same. as it had on their morning climb. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah said during their next rest stop. She tried to keep her voice calm, but she could hear the edge of concern creeping in. Michael was studying the map with the kind of focused intensity that appeared when he was genuinely worried. "I know the timing is all wrong. We should have reached the vista point by now." They were both experienced enough to know that getting lost in wilderness could quickly transform from an inconvenience into something much more serious. The afternoon was advancing, and while they still had several hours of daylight remaining, the margin for error was beginning to shrink. As they sat in the gathering shadows of the forest, both Sarah and Michael were beginning to understand that this was not a problem that could be solved through experience and determination alone. Something about this place, this trail, this day, was different from anything they had encountered before. The last photograph on Michael's camera, time-stamped at 4:47 p.m. on July 18, 2004, showed Sarah walking ahead of him on what appeared to be a well-marked trail. She was turning back to smile at the camera, her navy blue jacket now worn against the cooling air, her expression still confident despite their navigational challenges. It was the last image of them that anyone would ever see. Martha Henderson had been running the Talkeetna Lodge for 12 years, and in all that time, she had never lost a guest. Not once. She took pride in knowing every trail in the area, in giving accurate advice about weather and conditions, in sending people out with confidence that they would return safely to share stories over dinner. So, when Sarah and Michael Thompson failed to appear for the evening meal on July 18th, Martha felt the first flutter of genuine concern. They had struck her as responsible hikers, the kind of people who understood wilderness safety and followed the guidelines she had given them that morning. When they hadn't returned by sunset, that flutter became something stronger. Maybe they decided to camp overnight, her husband Robert suggested as they sat on the lodge's front porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Some folks like to watch the sunrise from the vista point," Martha shook her head. They didn't have camping gear with them, just day packs and water. She had noticed these details with the practiced eye of someone who had seen hundreds of hikers pass through her doors, and they seemed like the type to stick to their plans. By 10 p.m., Martha's concern had crystallized into certainty that something was wrong. She tried calling the emergency contact number the Thompsons had left with their registration, Sarah's sister in Portland, but there was no answer. The lack of cell phone coverage in the area meant that even if the couple was simply running late, they had no way to communicate their delay. She spent a restless night, stepping onto the porch every hour to listen for voices or footsteps that never came. By dawn on July 19th, she had made her decision. At 6 a.m., she placed a call to the Alaska State Troopers. Trooper Lieutenant David Chen received Martha's call at the beginning of what he expected to be a routine shift. Missing hikers were not uncommon in Alaska, and most situations resolved themselves within hours when people turned up having simply taken longer than expected. But Martha Henderson's reputation for reliability and her obvious concern convinced him to take the report seriously. Martha recounted the details methodically. The Thompsons had checked in on July 17th, planning to stay 2 nights. They were from the Seattle area, in their early 40s, experienced hikers with proper equipment. They had left on the morning of the 18th for the Talkeetna Ridge Trail, expecting to return by dinner time. They had not been seen since. "Did they file a trail register?" Chen asked. "Yes, I saw Michael fill it out before they left. Standard information, names, emergency contact, planned return time, vehicle description." When Chen reached the trailhead parking area, he immediately spotted the Thompsons' rental car, a blue Ford Explorer that matched Martha's description exactly. The vehicle was locked, with no signs of disturbance. The trail register confirmed what Martha had told him. But when he spoke with the rental car agency later that afternoon, he encountered the first puzzling detail. According to the agency's GPS tracking system, the Ford Explorer had never left the Anchorage airport area. The vehicle's last recorded position was in the rental lot where the Thompsons had picked it up 3 days earlier. That's impossible, Jen told the rental agency supervisor. I'm looking at the car right now, 60 miles from Anchorage. The supervisor double-checked her computer records. Sir, according to our system, that vehicle hasn't moved from space 47B in our lot. The GPS tracker shows it's been stationary since it was rented. It was the first detail that made Chen suspect this case might be more complicated than a simple hiking mishap. When the Thompsons failed to return by afternoon, Chen initiated a formal search and rescue operation. Within hours, a coordinated effort was underway involving state troopers, local volunteers, and helicopter support from the Alaska Air National Guard. Dr. Rebecca Martinez led the search coordination, bringing 15 years of experience with Alaska wilderness rescues. Her approach was methodical and comprehensive, based on statistical analysis of how lost hikers typically behaved in different terrain and weather conditions. Tell me about this trail, Martinez said during the initial briefing at the lodge. Martha described the Talkeetna Ridge Trail in detail, its length, difficulty level, terrain features, and typical hiking times. Robert added his knowledge of the local geography, pointing out creek crossings, vista points, and areas where hikers might become confused. 4.5 miles to the main viewpoint, Martinez noted. Well-marked trail, intermediate difficulty. What's the longest anyone has ever been overdue on this particular route? Never more than a few hours, Martha replied. And that was during bad weather. These folks have been missing for over 30 hours now. The first search teams departed at dawn on July 20th. They were composed of experienced volunteers who knew the local terrain, state troopers trained in wilderness search techniques, and 3 trained search dogs with their handlers. The morning was clear and mild, with excellent visibility, perfect conditions for both ground and air search operations. Tom Bradley, a local man who had hiked the Talkeetna Ridge Trail dozens of times, led the primary ground team. As his team moved up the trail from the parking area, he found himself puzzled by the complete absence of any signs that the Thompsons had passed this way. Should be seeing some kind of sign by now, Bradley told his partner, State Trooper Jessica Wong. Footprints, maybe something dropped, disturbed vegetation, but it's like nobody's been on this trail in weeks. The search dogs were having similar difficulties. Trained to follow human scent, they showed no interest in the trail beyond the registration box. Each dog was given clothing items from the Thompsons' room at the lodge to establish their scent profile, but none could pick up any trace of the missing hikers having walked the trail. By midday, the ground teams had covered the entire length of the Talkeetna Ridge Trail twice, examining every potential shelter, rest area, and vista point. They had found no trace of Sarah and Michael Thompson, no footprints, no dropped items, no disturbed vegetation, no emergency signals. The helicopter search covered a much broader area, using both visual observation and thermal imaging equipment. From the air, the vast scale of the Alaska wilderness became apparent. Even from helicopter altitude, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by rivers, lakes, and mountain peaks. As the first day of searching progressed, without results, Martinez found herself confronting an increasingly puzzling situation. In her experience, missing hikers usually turned up within the first 24 hours of intensive searching. The complete absence of any trace was highly unusual. Sarah's sister Jessica arrived from Portland that evening, having driven through the night. She was a younger version of Sarah, with the same auburn hair and worried green eyes, but without her sister's outdoors experience. The wilderness that Sarah found exhilarating seemed to intimidate Jessica. Sarah would never just disappear, Jessica told Martinez. She's the most responsible person I know. If she said she'd be back by dinner time, she meant it. Jessica provided additional details that helped flesh out the search profile. Both were experienced hikers who had traveled extensively in wilderness areas. Sarah was a school counselor, thoughtful and careful, while Michael was a software engineer with excellent attention to detail. Neither had any history of risk-taking behavior or poor judgment in outdoor situations. The second day of searching brought additional resources. The Alaska Air National Guard provided a second helicopter, and volunteers from 3 different mountain rescue organizations joined the ground teams. The search area was expanded to include terrain several miles from the main trail, but the results were the same. No trace of the missing hikers. The third day brought federal involvement. Special Agent Patricia Coleman from the FBI's Anchorage office arrived to assess whether the disappearance might involve criminal activity. Her interview with Martha and Robert Henderson revealed no red flags. The Thompsons had appeared happy and relaxed during their stay. They had mentioned no concerns about being followed or threatened. Coleman's review of the physical evidence was equally puzzling. The Thompsons' rental car showed no signs of tampering. Their room at the lodge was undisturbed, with personal belongings and expensive camera equipment left behind. Their credit cards had not been used since the morning they departed. From a criminal investigation standpoint, this doesn't fit any pattern I recognize, Coleman told Martinez. There's no evidence of foul play, no obvious motive for someone to harm them. The analysis of the vehicle's GPS system revealed the puzzling discrepancy that Chen had discovered earlier. According to the rental agency's tracking system, the Ford Explorer had never left the Anchorage airport, but the vehicle's own internal computer showed a record of the trip to Talkeetna. By the end of the third day, the official search and rescue operation had covered over 200 square miles of wilderness. Ground teams had systematically examined every mile of the Talkeetna Ridge Trail and dozens of alternative routes. Helicopter searches had used both visual and thermal imaging to scan vast areas of forest, valleys, and mountain slopes. Dr. Martinez faced the difficult decision that no search coordinator wanted to make. We're going to scale back the active search, she announced. We'll maintain periodic patrols and continue to investigate any new leads, but the intensive phase of the operation is concluded. Jessica Thompson received the news with composure that impressed everyone who witnessed it. I understand, she told Martinez quietly. You've done everything possible. Thank you for trying so hard. But privately, Jessica was devastated. The idea that her sister and brother-in-law had simply vanished without explanation was almost impossible to accept. Sarah had been the steady one in their family, the person who always had a plan and always followed through. Media attention began to focus on the case during the fourth day. Alaska's newspapers picked up the story first, followed by television stations and eventually national news outlets. The complete mystery of the Thompsons' disappearance captured public imagination in a way that more straightforward missing person cases rarely did. Internet forums devoted to missing persons cases began extensive discussions of the Thompson disappearance. Amateur investigators analyzed every detail, proposing theories that ranged from plausible to bizarre. Some suggested the couple had encountered dangerous wildlife. Others proposed they had fallen into hidden crevasses. Martha Henderson found herself at the center of unwanted media attention. Reporters called the lodge constantly, seeking interviews about the missing guests. Television crews appeared at the trailhead, filming reports against the backdrop of the wilderness where the Thompsons had vanished. The media attention brought both benefits and complications. Tips poured in from across the country as people claimed to have seen the Thompsons or to have information about their disappearance. Coleman and her team investigated each lead methodically, but none produced meaningful results. As summer turned to fall, the active investigation gradually wound down. The Alaska State Troopers maintained the case file and continued to follow up on occasional leads, but the intensive effort of the first weeks could not be sustained indefinitely. Dr. Martinez prepared her final report, a document that would become the official record of one of Alaska's most puzzling disappearances. Despite extensive search efforts involving ground teams, aerial reconnaissance, specialized equipment, and trained search animals, no trace of Michael and Sarah Thompson was discovered, Martinez wrote. Winter brought an end to any possibility of finding the Thompsons alive, though search efforts continued sporadically. Snow covered the trails and made access to remote areas extremely difficult. The case file remained active, but hope for resolution gradually faded. In spring 2005, as snow melted and trails became accessible again, there was a brief resurgence of activity. Volunteer searchers, including several members of the Thompsons' families, organized their own expeditions to areas that had not been thoroughly examined. They found nothing. Jessica Thompson hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Robert Chase, who specialized in missing persons cases. Chase spent 2 weeks in Alaska, re-interviewing witnesses, examining evidence, and conducting his own searches. His conclusion matched that of the official investigation. The Thompsons had vanished without leaving any discoverable trace. By 2006, media interest in the Thompson case had largely faded. Occasional anniversary articles appeared in Alaska newspapers, and the story was sometimes featured on television programs about unsolved mysteries. But public attention had moved on. In 2007, 3 years after the Thompsons' disappearance, the state officially changed their status from missing to presumed deceased. The legal designation allowed their families to begin settling their affairs and provided some measure of closure, though it answered none of the fundamental questions. Jessica Thompson attended the brief hearing where the status change was formalized. Afterward, she stood outside the courthouse in Anchorage, looking toward the mountains where her sister had vanished, and tried to accept that she might never know the truth. "I used to think that if something terrible happened to Sarah, at least I would know about it," she told a reporter. "I never imagined that she could just disappear completely, like she never existed at all." The Talkeetna Ridge Trail remained open to the public, though it was seldom used. The mystery of the Thompson disappearance had given the area an ominous reputation that discouraged casual hikers. Martha Henderson noticed that guests at the lodge increasingly chose other trails for their adventures. As the years passed, the Thompson case became part of local folklore. Longtime residents of the Talkeetna area would occasionally mention it when discussing the dangers of wilderness travel, but even they struggled to explain what might have happened to the missing couple. The case file remained in the Alaska State Troopers archives, a thick folder containing hundreds of pages of reports, witness statements, search records, and photographs. But for all its documentation, the file contained no answers, only the detailed record of how 2 people had walked into the Alaska wilderness one bright July morning and never returned. And in the vast silence of the Alaska wilderness, their absence became a presence of its own, a reminder that even in the modern world, with all its technology and communication systems, people could still disappear as completely as if they had never existed at all. James Wilson had never expected his hobby to make him famous, and he certainly never expected it to reopen one of Alaska's most enduring mysteries. The documentary filmmaker from Seattle had been experimenting with thermal imaging drones for 3 years, fascinated by the technology's ability to reveal hidden patterns in the landscape. His YouTube channel, Thermal Wilderness, had a modest following of outdoor enthusiasts who appreciated his detailed surveys of remote forest areas. In August 2023, Wilson was testing a new thermal camera system in the Talkeetna mountain region, specifically looking for old mining roads and abandoned settlements that might be invisible to conventional aerial photography. He had obtained the necessary permits for drone flights and was methodically mapping sectors of wilderness that hadn't been thoroughly documented since the 1960s. He launched his drone from a clearing about 2 miles from the Talkeetna Ridge, trailhead on a clear afternoon in late August. The weather conditions were perfect for thermal imaging: steady temperatures, minimal wind, and excellent visibility. Wilson planned to survey approximately 15 square miles during the 4-hour flight, following a systematic grid pattern that would ensure complete coverage. Wilson was reviewing the day's footage that evening in his hotel room when he noticed something unusual. During a 5-second sequence at approximately 3:47 p.m., the thermal camera had captured 2 distinct human-shaped heat signatures walking side by side through an area of dense forest. The figures appeared to be carrying backpacks and moving at a steady pace along what looked like a trail. The 2 figures moved across the camera's field of view for exactly 5 seconds before disappearing behind a rocky outcropping. Wilson advanced the footage frame by frame, watching the heat signatures move with what appeared to be human locomotion, the characteristic rhythm of 2 people walking together. But when the drone's camera angle shifted to follow their apparent path around the rocks, the thermal signatures vanished completely. Wilson spent several hours analyzing the footage, enhancing the images and checking the timestamp and GPS coordinates. The thermal signatures were clear and unambiguous: 2 human-shaped forms with the heat distribution pattern characteristic of living people. But their sudden disappearance behind the rocks was puzzling. It was only when Wilson began researching the location of his thermal captures that he discovered the connection to the Thompson disappearance. The GPS coordinates of the thermal signatures placed them within a few hundred yards of the area where Sarah and Michael Thompson had vanished in 2004, almost exactly 19 years earlier. Wilson's discovery of this connection transformed his routine drone survey into something far more significant. He spent the next week researching the Thompson case, reading every article and report he could find about the couple's disappearance. The similarities between his thermal captures and the description of the missing hikers were striking. "I know how this sounds," Wilson said in the video he posted to his YouTube channel on September 3rd, 2023, "but I think I might have captured thermal images of Sarah and Michael Thompson 19 years after they disappeared." The video included the enhanced thermal footage, side-by-side comparisons with photographs of the Thompsons from 2004, and detailed analysis of the GPS coordinates and timing. Wilson was careful to present his findings as potentially significant, rather than making definitive claims, but the implications were obvious. The video went viral within hours of being posted. Wilson's subscriber count jumped from 1,200 to over 50,000 in the first week as the footage was shared across social media platforms and picked up by news outlets. The thermal images were analyzed, debated, and scrutinized by thousands of people who had never heard of the Thompson case before. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a thermal imaging specialist at the University of Washington, agreed to examine Wilson's footage for authenticity. Rodriguez had 15 years of experience with thermal camera technology and had testified as an expert witness in numerous legal cases involving thermal evidence. "The images appear to be authentic," Rodriguez concluded after her analysis. "There's No evidence of digital manipulation or enhancement that would create false thermal signatures. Whatever Mr. Wilson's camera captured, it was generating body heat consistent with living humans. But Rodriguez was careful to note that thermal imaging could not definitively identify specific individuals. We can confirm that these are human-shaped heat signatures, but we cannot determine who these people were or when the footage was actually captured beyond the camera's timestamp. The release of Wilson's footage prompted immediate response from law enforcement agencies. The Alaska State Troopers reopened the Thompson case within a week of the video's publication, assigning a new investigative team to examine the thermal evidence and its potential implications. Detective Sergeant Maria Santos, who took charge of the reopened investigation, approached Wilson's footage with professional skepticism. Santos had 12 years of experience with missing persons cases and understood both the value and limitations of different types of evidence. Santos and her team conducted extensive interviews with Wilson, examining his equipment, methods, and the chain of custody for his footage. They found no evidence of tampering or manipulation, but Santos remained cautious about the implications of the thermal captures. The renewed attention to the Thompson case brought Jessica Thompson back into the public eye. Now in her 50s, Jessica had spent 19 years wondering what had happened to her sister and brother-in-law. The thermal footage represented the first potential lead in the case since 2004. "Part of me wants to believe that James captured something real," Jessica told reporters during a press conference. "But another part of me is afraid to hope after. All these years, I've learned that false leads can be more painful than no leads at all." Jessica had remarried and started a new family in the years since her sister's disappearance, but Sarah's absence remained a constant presence in her life. She had named her daughter Sarah Elizabeth in honor of her missing sister and had maintained a small memorial website that recorded memories and photographs from their shared childhood. The reopened investigation brought Jessica back to Alaska. For the first time since 2005, she met with Detective Santos and visited the Talkeetna area, including the trail where her sister had disappeared. The experience was emotionally overwhelming, bringing back all the grief and uncertainty that had never fully resolved. The investigation team, working with new technology and resources unavailable in 2004, began a systematic re-examination of the Thompson case. They used ground-penetrating radar to survey areas near where Wilson had captured the thermal signatures, looking for any evidence that might have been missed during the original searches. The radar surveys revealed several interesting geological features: old mine shafts, natural caves, and underground water channels, but no evidence directly related to the missing hikers. However, the surveys did confirm that the area was geologically complex, with numerous underground voids and unstable terrain that could have concealed evidence. 3 weeks into the reopened investigation, the team made their first significant discovery. A search volunteer working near the GPS coordinates of Wilson's thermal captures found a piece of navy blue fabric caught between rocks in a small ravine. The fabric was weathered and faded, but forensic analysis confirmed that it was consistent with the jacket Sarah Thompson had been wearing when she disappeared. The fabric discovery prompted an intensive search of the immediate area. Using metal detectors, search dogs, and careful excavation techniques, the team uncovered additional evidence that had somehow been missed during the original searches. A weak radio signal was detected in the area, transmitted on a frequency used by emergency beacons in the early 2000s. The signal was intermittent and barely detectable, but its presence suggested that an emergency device might be buried or concealed somewhere nearby. Most significantly, searchers found a fresh carving on a tree near where the fabric had been discovered. The carving showed a double arrow symbol cut deep into the bark with what appeared to be a sharp knife. The marking looked recent, despite being in a location that had been thoroughly searched multiple times over the years. The discovery of physical evidence transformed the investigation from a review of old files into an active case with genuine leads to pursue. Santos expanded her team and requested additional resources from the state police headquarters in Anchorage. Forensic analysis of the fabric sample revealed traces of DNA that matched samples taken from Sarah Thompson's personal belongings in 2004. The genetic evidence provided the first definitive proof that Sarah had been in the area where Wilson's thermal camera had captured the mysterious figures. "This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for," Santos announced during a press conference. "We now have physical evidence that places Sarah Thompson in the specific location where the thermal imagery was captured." But the DNA evidence also raised new questions. Laboratory analysis suggested that the fabric had been exposed to environmental conditions for an extended period, consistent with it being in the wilderness for 19 years. However, the location where it was found had been searched multiple times, and the fabric showed no signs of being buried or concealed. The radio signal proved equally mysterious. Technical analysis confirmed that it was being transmitted by a device consistent with emergency beacons used in the early 2000s, the type of equipment the Thompsons would have carried. But the signal's intermittent nature and weak strength suggested that the device was either damaged, low on power, or somehow shielded from easy detection. Attempts to triangulate the exact source of the radio signal were frustrated by the mountainous terrain and the signal's intermittent nature. Search teams with direction-finding equipment narrowed the source to an area of approximately 50 yards, but repeated excavations and surveys failed to locate the transmitting device. The tree carving became the subject of intensive investigation. Forensic analysis of the carved wood revealed that the markings had been made within the previous 6 months, despite the location having been searched as recently as 2022 during periodic reviews of the case. The double arrow symbol was researched extensively, with investigators consulting with hiking organizations, wilderness survival experts, and historical societies. The symbol appeared to be a trail marker of some kind, but its specific meaning remained unclear. As the investigation progressed, the media attention intensified. News outlets from around the world covered the developments in the Thompson case, drawn by the mysterious nature of the evidence and the technological aspects of Wilson's discovery. The thermal footage became one of the most widely viewed pieces of evidence in any missing persons case. Internet forums devoted to unsolved mysteries generated thousands of pages of discussion about the Thompson case. Users proposed theories, ranging from the plausible to the far-fetched, analyzed every frame of the thermal footage and created detailed maps showing the locations of all the physical evidence. Dr. Michael Park, a professor of physics at MIT who specialized in thermal dynamics, offered a scientific perspective on Wilson's footage. Thermal imaging captures heat signatures from living organisms, Park explained in an interview. There's no known scientific mechanism by which thermal cameras could detect the presence of people who are not actually there, generating body heat. But Park acknowledged that the footage raised questions he couldn't answer. The images are clear and unambiguous, 2 human-shaped heat sources moving through the forest. From a purely scientific standpoint, something was there generating body heat when the camera captured those images. The investigation reached a critical juncture in late October 2023, when geological surveys revealed significant instability in the area where most of the evidence had been discovered. Engineers determined that recent rainfall and seasonal freeze-thaw cycles had created dangerous conditions, with the risk of rock slides and slope collapse. "We're going to have to suspend active searching in the immediate area," Santos announced reluctantly. "The geological conditions present an unacceptable risk to search personnel, and we can't justify putting people in danger." The decision to suspend searches was particularly frustrating, given the recent discoveries. The investigation team felt they were closer to answers than ever before, but the safety concerns were genuine and non-negotiable. Jessica Thompson received the news of the suspension with mixed emotions. The recent discoveries had rekindled hope that her sister's fate might finally be explained, but she understood the safety concerns that necessitated the delay. "I've waited 19 years for answers," Jessica said in a statement released through her attorney. "I can wait a little longer if it means no one else gets hurt, but I hope the authorities will resume the search as soon as it's safe to do so." The suspension of active searching marked the end of the most intensive phase of the reopened investigation. While the case remained officially active, resources were redirected to other priorities, and the Thompson mystery once again settled into the background of Alaska's ongoing cases. But the evidence discovered during the investigation, the fabric, the radio signal, the tree carving, remained unexplained. Combined with Wilson's thermal footage, these discoveries had transformed the Thompson case from a cold missing persons file into one of Alaska's most puzzling active investigations. As winter approached and snow began to cover the Talkeetna Mountains, the area where Sarah and Michael Thompson had disappeared returned to the silence and isolation that had characterized it for 19 years. But now that silence carried the weight of new questions, new evidence, and new mysteries that seemed to deepen rather than resolve with each discovery. Dr. Patricia Reeves had spent 30 years studying the psychology of missing persons cases. But the Thompson file presented anomalies that challenged every framework she had developed. When Detective Santos asked her to consult on the reopened investigation in November 2023, Reeves thought she was being brought in to provide a standard psychological profile. Instead, she found herself confronting evidence that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of criminal investigation. Most missing persons cases follow predictable patterns, Reeves explained to Santos during their first meeting. People disappear for specific reasons: accident, criminal activity, voluntary departure, medical emergency. The evidence usually points toward one of these explanations, even when we can't prove exactly what happened. The Thompson case didn't fit any of the standard patterns. Experienced hikers, good weather, well-marked. Trail, no personal problems, no evidence of criminal activity. And then, 19 years later, thermal footage and physical evidence appearing in areas that had been searched repeatedly. "I've seen cases where evidence was overlooked during initial searches and discovered years later," Reeves said. "But this is different. The fabric, the radio signal, the tree carving, they appear to have manifested in locations that were thoroughly searched multiple times." The psychological profile Reeves developed of Sarah and Michael Thompson reinforced the puzzle of their disappearance. Based on interviews with family members, friends, and colleagues, both were exceptionally responsible and safety-conscious individuals. Sarah's work as a school counselor required her to make careful assessments of risk. Michael's career in software engineering had trained him to think systematically about problem-solving. These are not people who would take unnecessary risks or deviate from their stated plans without compelling reasons, Reeves concluded. Their psychological profiles suggest they would have responded to any emergency by following established safety procedures. The couple's relationship was equally stable. Married for 15 years, they had no history of significant conflicts or behavioral changes that might suggest hidden stress. Their decision to vacation in Alaska was consistent with a shared love of outdoor activities and represented a celebration rather than an escape. From a psychological perspective, there's nothing in their backgrounds that would predict a voluntary disappearance, Reeves told Santos. If they had wanted to start new lives, there were easier ways to accomplish that than vanishing in the Alaska wilderness. As Reeves delved deeper into the case, she began to focus on James Wilson's thermal footage as the key to understanding the broader pattern of evidence. The 5 seconds of video showing 2 human figures had been analyzed by multiple experts, all of whom confirmed its authenticity. If we accept that the thermal footage is genuine, we have to consider some very difficult questions, Reeves told the investigation team during a briefing in December 2023. What were 2 people doing in that specific location? Why did they disappear from thermal detection so suddenly? And why does their physical description match the Thompsons so precisely? The scientific consensus was that thermal cameras captured actual heat sources. There was no known mechanism by which they could generate false images of people who weren't actually present. Detective Santos found herself confronting questions that exceeded her training and experience. "I've worked missing persons cases for 12 years, she confided to Reeves. "I understand how evidence gets missed and found later, but this case feels different, like the normal rules don't apply." The intermittent radio signal continued to puzzle technical experts. The frequency and transmission characteristics matched emergency beacons from the early 2000s, but the signal's persistence after 19 years defied the known limitations of the technology. In January 2024, the investigation received an unexpected boost when Martha Henderson came forward with information she had never shared with previous investigators. Henderson, now in her 70s, had been reluctant to mention details that seemed irrelevant to the original search efforts. "There was something strange about the morning they left," Henderson told Santos during a recorded interview. "Nothing I could put my finger on exactly, but something felt different." Henderson explained that she had noticed unusual wildlife behavior on the morning of July 18, 2004. Birds in the area around the lodge had been agitated and noisy, flying in erratic patterns. Her dogs, normally calm and friendly with guests, had been restless and unwilling to approach the Thompsons. "My animals are usually good judges of character," Henderson said, "but that morning they acted like something was wrong, even though Sarah and Michael seemed perfectly normal." Henderson also recalled that the weather conditions had been unusually stable on the day the Thompsons disappeared. "We don't get many days in Alaska where the weather stays exactly the same from dawn to dusk. But that day, the temperature, wind and visibility never changed. It was like time had stopped." The investigation faced a significant setback in February 2024, when geological surveys confirmed that the area containing most of the physical evidence remained unstable and dangerous for search operations. Engineers estimated that safe access to the site would not be possible until late spring at the earliest. The delay was particularly frustrating for Jessica Thompson, who had maintained hope that the recent discoveries would finally provide answers about her sister's fate. Nearly 20 years of uncertainty had taken a profound emotional toll. "I understand the safety concerns," Jessica said during a phone interview with Santos, "but my sister has been missing for 2 decades. Every delay feels like another piece of my life disappearing." Jessica had established a memorial scholarship fund in Sarah's name, providing financial assistance to students pursuing careers in education. The fund had helped dozens of young people over the years, creating a positive legacy that honored Sarah's commitment to helping others. "I still dream about Sarah sometimes," Jessica confided. "In my dreams, she's trying to tell me something, but I can never quite understand what she's saying. I wake up feeling like she's still out there somewhere, trying to find her way home." The investigation continued through the winter months, with analysis of existing evidence and attempts to develop new leads. One area of focus was the double arrow carving found on the tree near where Sarah's fabric had been discovered. Extensive research into trail marking systems had failed to identify the specific meaning of the symbol. The carving could be someone's attempt to communicate about the Thompson case, suggested Dr. Karen Walsh, an expert in symbolic communication. The timing of its appearance suggests it might be a deliberate message. The investigation team also focused on Wilson's thermal footage, subjecting it to every available form of analysis. Enhancement techniques revealed additional details about the figure's movement patterns, but also raised new questions about their behavior. The thermal signatures show normal human locomotion, reported video analyst Lisa Park. But their movement pattern is interesting. They walk at a perfectly steady pace, never pausing or adjusting their gait, which is unusual for people hiking on uneven terrain. The steadiness of the figure's movement was particularly notable because the area where they were captured was characterized by rocky, uneven ground that would normally require hikers to adjust their pace frequently. Yet the thermal signatures showed no variation in speed or stride length. In April 2024, geological conditions finally stabilized enough to permit limited searching in the areas where evidence had been discovered. Santos assembled a small team of experienced searchers equipped with the most advanced detection equipment available. The renewed search began on a clear morning that reminded everyone involved of the weather conditions on the day the Thompsons had disappeared. Within hours of beginning the search, the team made a discovery that would fundamentally change their understanding of the Thompson case. Using new ground-penetrating radar, they detected a void approximately 8 feet underground in an area that had been searched multiple times over the years. Careful excavation revealed an opening to an underground chamber that extended far deeper than the radar had initially indicated. The cave system was complex and dangerous, with multiple passages leading in different directions. More significantly, the cave showed signs of recent human presence. Inside the cave, searchers found evidence that would provide the first definitive answers about the Thompson case in 20 years. Personal items belonging to Sarah and Michael Thompson were discovered in a small chamber, approximately 30 feet from the main entrance. The items included Michael's watch, Sarah's hiking boots, and the emergency beacon that had been transmitting the intermittent radio signal. But the most significant discovery was a collection of photographs that Michael had apparently taken during their final hours. The images, preserved on a memory card inside a waterproof camera case, showed the progression of events that had led to their disappearance. The photographs revealed that the Thompsons had indeed become lost on their hike, but had found what appeared to be a trail marker, the same double arrow symbol later carved on the tree above. Following the marker's indication, they had discovered the cave entrance and decided to take shelter there while waiting for rescue. The final photographs showed Sarah and Michael inside the cave system, apparently healthy and in good spirits, despite their situation. But the images also revealed that they had proceeded deeper into the cave than was safe, becoming trapped when a rockfall blocked their exit route. The photographic evidence indicates that the Thompsons survived their initial disappearance by several days, Santos announced during a press conference. They found shelter in the cave system and were attempting to signal for rescue when they became trapped by geological activity. The discovery of the cave chamber and its contents provided closure to the Thompson case, but also raised new questions about the evidence that had led to the breakthrough. The double arrow carving that had appeared on the tree was identical to markers the Thompsons had apparently followed into the cave system. Jessica Thompson flew to Alaska to be present when her sister's remains were recovered from the cave system. After 20 years of uncertainty, she finally had answers about Sarah's fate and the knowledge that her sister had not suffered alone in her final days. Reading through Michael's notes and seeing Sarah's last photographs, I can tell they faced their situation with courage and hope, Jessica said during a memorial service held at the Talkeetna Lodge. They never gave up believing that someone would find them. The Thompson case was officially closed in June 2024, nearly 20 years after Sarah and Michael had walked onto the Talkeetna Ridge Trail for what they expected to be a routine day hike. The resolution brought satisfaction to the investigators, who had worked on the case over the years, but it also highlighted how easily people could disappear, even in areas that seemed well mapped and thoroughly searched. Dr. Reeves's final report emphasized the role that geological factors had played in concealing evidence and misleading search efforts. The cave system where the Thompsons had taken shelter was virtually invisible from the surface and had remained undetected by previous search technologies. The Thompson case demonstrates that wilderness areas can conceal evidence in ways that challenge our investigative assumptions, Reeves wrote. Underground water flow, geological activity, and natural cave systems can create circumstances where people and physical evidence remain hidden for decades. James Wilson's thermal footage, which had initiated the renewed investigation, was ultimately classified as showing two other hikers who had passed through the area shortly before the cave discovery. The timing and location of the thermal captures had been coincidental, though they had proved instrumental in focusing attention on the correct search area. Martha Henderson, who had reported the Thompsons missing 20 years earlier, attended the memorial service and found some measure of peace in knowing that her instincts had been correct. "I always believed they were still out there somewhere," she said. "I'm glad they've finally been found." The Talkeetna Ridge Trail remained open to the public, but with improved safety signage warning hikers about the presence of concealed cave systems. The area where the Thompsons had disappeared became a memorial site, marked with a simple plaque acknowledging their memory. For Jessica Thompson, the resolution brought both relief and renewed grief. The certainty about Sarah's fate was welcome after decades of uncertainty, but it also marked the final end of hope that her sister might somehow still be alive. "I always imagined that if we found Sarah, she would be able to tell me what happened," Jessica reflected. Instead, Michael's photographs and notes told the story for them. In a way, that's even more powerful because it shows how much they loved each other and how they faced their situation together. The Thompson case became part of the curriculum at the Alaska Law Enforcement Academy, used as an example of how missing persons investigations could be complicated by environmental factors and how persistence in following leads could eventually yield results even decades later. Detective Santos was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to the state's cold case unit. Her work on the Thompson case demonstrated the value of applying new technologies to older cases, leading to the resolution of several other long-standing missing persons investigations. The cave system where Sarah and Michael Thompson had spent their final days was sealed to prevent future accidents, but their story lived on as a reminder of both the beauty and danger of Alaska's wilderness. Their love for each other and their determination to survive had been preserved in Michael's photographs and notes, creating a record of courage and devotion that transcended the tragedy of their disappearance. As autumn returned to the Talkeetna Mountains in 2024, the area that had held the Thompson mystery for 20 years returned to its natural quiet. But the silence was different now. No longer the silence of unanswered questions, but the peace that comes when stories find their proper endings. The trail where Sarah and Michael Thompson had begun their final adventure remained a place of natural beauty, visited by hikers who now carried with them the knowledge of what had happened there. Their story had become part of the landscape's history, a reminder that every wilderness holds stories of the people who have passed through it. In the end, through persistence, technology, and chance, Sarah and Michael Thompson's story had been told, not by their own voices, but by the evidence they left behind and the photographs that captured their final journey together into the Alaska wilderness they had come so far to experience. Their love for adventure had brought them to Alaska, and their love for each other had sustained them through their final days. In a place where people could disappear without trace, they had left behind proof that even in the face of tragedy, human connection and hope could endure. And so, dear friends, we come to the end of a story that reminds us how precious and fragile our connections to one another truly are. Sarah and Michael Thompson's journey into the Alaska wilderness began as a celebration of their love and shared dreams, but it became something far more profound, a testament to the power of human devotion in the face of unimaginable circumstances. For 20 years, their families wondered and worried, never knowing whether to grieve or hope. For 20 years, the wilderness kept their secret, until technology and determination finally brought them home. Their story teaches us that love doesn't end when people disappear. It continues in the hearts of those who remember them, in the search efforts that never truly stop, and in the small acts of courage that people show when facing the unknown. If this story has touched your heart the way it has touched mine, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who understands that true love stories aren't always about happy endings. Sometimes they're about the strength we find in each other when everything else falls away. Leave a comment below and tell us about someone you love who would face any challenge by your side, just as Sarah and Michael faced theirs together. Because in a world where people can disappear without warning, where mysteries can remain unsolved for decades, the most important thing we can do is hold tight to the people who matter most and never take for granted the time we have together. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Until next time, remember that every story matters, every person matters, and sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that bring us home. End of story.